Hello, and welcome to Tech Latest from Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. I'm your host, Katey Creel, and in this week's episode, we're joined by Mai Nguyen in Hanoi to talk about the latest developments in Vietnam's AI ambitions. Welcome to the show, Mai.
Thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, we're talking about AI and one of the most exciting emerging tech hubs in Asia, Vietnam. Now, the country's long been a manufacturing powerhouse, and more recent years, it's been extra important as a production base for tech companies. Samsung, I think, makes nearly half, or certainly a big portion of its smartphones in the country for export. Now, however, Vietnam has even bigger ambitions, especially in the areas of chips and AI. Mai, can you tell us a bit about how Vietnam hopes to move up the tech value chain and which areas it's focusing on?
Yes. So Vietnam is boosting development in technology and science across the board because it believes that this is the key for the country to climb up the global economic ranking in coming years. So there's two areas that the country focuses heavily on, AI and semiconductor. And why these two areas? Well, for semiconductor, Vietnam has already had quite an extensive amount of foreign direct investment into this area already.
Oh.
So as of last year, around $11 billion in investment was registered. So it's a natural choice there. But semiconductor, as you know, is very expensive. And the leading countries are already years ahead in research and investment. So Vietnam also looks to AI, which is relatively newer and cheaper to develop.
That's really interesting that you mentioned AI as kind of a cheaper alternative for focusing on rather than chip making, because I think a lot of people would associate AI with quite big investment in the chips itself and the hardware in the data centers. But I guess there's kind of areas where you can leverage it without massive investment.
Yeah, so there's so many conferences so far this year in Vietnam, left and right in many areas, and I really try to understand them. It's quite technical, but basically what I understand is for AI, a lot of it has to do with coding and software, which is basically you have a computer, you have a electricity, and you can sort of make your ways around it. Whereas semiconductor, as they describe it, you need like a huge lab, which is super clean, lots of money put into it, which, Vietnam can't really compete with the top countries like US, Taiwan, even China. So
that makes a lot of sense, it being more on the application side, which is becoming a bigger focus in the AI segment. We've had so much investment into chips and data centers and the infrastructure that investors are starting to wonder, when are we going to start making money from this thing? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, Vietnam's probably in a very good place in terms of breaking into AI.
Yeah. So coincidentally, last year, Vietnam has a new leader. Basically, in political terms, and him and his party leadership is pushing the country through the biggest reform in 4 decades. So they're cutting down civil servants, opening up sectors, relaxing regulations, and introducing incentives, especially to the private sector, and specifically in tech and infrastructure. So the political will is there. It's very strong. And as I mentioned, the top leaders really think technology is the niche area that Vietnam can leverage on to climb up the ladder. And the country has quite a young and tech-savvy population, and costs are still relatively cheap in the global standard, and there's much room to grow. And there's also a heavy focus on STEM education in Vietnam. So the Vietnamese youth are doing quite well in math, physics, and other science subjects. So it's a natural advantage that Vietnam could utilize in this AI race.
That is a really good point, because we've looked at over the past months and years that the race for tech talent, especially chip and AI talent, is really fierce. And I think any country that really makes STEM education a priority is going to be well placed. And all these efforts by Vietnam are starting to pay off, clearly. The latest came with Qualcomm. They just opened I think its first regional R&D center in Hanoi.
Yes, so Qualcomm this week launched their R&D center, which will be focusing on AI, specifically generative and agentic AI solutions for smartphones, personal computers, XR, automotive, and Internet of Things applications. They said that this is the first AI R&D center in Southeast Asia. So Qualcomm actually bought a local company called Movian AI from the local conglomerate Vingroup. And that unit is now the Qualcomm R&D Center on AI. So their old office is in Hanoi, the capital, and I'm told they're looking at several options for a new office.
Oh, wow.
The R&D center here has more than 100 people, I'm told, and it's led by a scientist called Dr. Hung Bui. He used to work at Google DeepMind, and he came back to Vietnam in 2019 to found this company called Movian AI or Vin AI. And it's an expansion of Qualcomm's business in Vietnam, actually. The company has been here operating for more than 20 years. So they have quite an extensive network and collaboration with the biggest tech companies in Vietnam, such as like Viettel, VNPT, etc.
It's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Hung Bui. Are there a lot of kind of tech talent or entrepreneurs coming back to Vietnam recently?
Yes, there is actually a rising trend of these Vietnamese overseas talents returning to the country. From my conversations with some of them, they are driven by either the attractive packages that private companies are offering, or they simply have gained enough experience overseas, earn enough money, and now actually want to go back and contribute to the growth of Vietnam. And then, or some of them just really come back because they miss their home and they miss the food.
That's understandable.
Yeah, and it's actually as one of the people describe it to me, there's so many challenges and nuances that you face in Vietnam where in a developed country maybe you don't have to go through. So for the bright minds out there, it's a challenge that they like to tackle. Yeah, so Dr. Hung Bui is one of them. He returned to Vietnam in 2019 and founded that company and now continues his journey at Qualcomm.
It kind of has shades of Taiwan in, I guess it was maybe the 70s, when they invited a lot of talent who'd been studying or working overseas to come back and help build their chip industry. So
yeah.
I can see it's kind of a good strategy if you can bring back the experience and connections.
Yes. Actually, the government is also looking at incentives to attract even more these talents to come home. They were looking at the China 1,000 talents policy, the incentives that they gave to these talents. And then at the moment, the Vietnamese government is changing its citizenship law to make it more attractive to these people to come home, gaining access to land ownership and investment and saving, preferential saving options in Vietnam. But I believe in the future there will be more programs, but it remains to be seen.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, Qualcomm's not the only company that has acquired a Vietnamese AI unit. There's also, I think, NVIDIA last year bought VinBrain.
Yes.
Yeah. How are local companies feeling about this, or local authorities having foreign names like Qualcomm and NVIDIA come in and make acquisitions? Are they happy and welcoming this? Are they?
Yes, totally. Because Vietnam is, compared to the global tech platform, it's still relatively young and underdeveloped in some way. It's very potential, but there's so much to grow. And with these big companies coming into Vietnam, it sort of helped facilitate the growth of the industry as a whole. And hopefully, they will nurture local companies even more to grow. But can I just point out, though, that actually the VinBrain, which was acquired by NVIDIA, and the Qualcomm deal acquiring Movian AI, it was actually both these companies, VinBrain and Movian AI, were parts of the local conglomerate Vingroup. And Vingroup's founder, the Vietnam's first billionaire, Phạm Nhật Vượng, he actually said that when he sold these two companies to Qualcomm and NVIDIA, one of the requirements was that these global tech firms have to set up R&D centers in Vietnam and hire Vietnamese people. So I've noticed on LinkedIn in the past few weeks that NVIDIA has started hiring people here. And yeah, it's clearly an exciting moment for the local people and government because they generally look up to these big global companies. But outside of these deals, where they are not, we'll get another global tech company to choose Vietnam for their AI R&D center remains to be seen, because I think many countries are competing, right, and trying to get ahead.
Absolutely. It's the hottest
yeah,
hottest segment of the tech world right now is competing for AI talent.
Exactly. So and then Vietnam is going through a lot of reforms, and even though in the long term all these reforms, it's going to have a positive impact, but because of the ongoing changes, it's making investment decision a bit tricky because of the uncertainty. Not to mention the impact of the Trump tariffs, which are huge for Vietnam because it's an export-oriented economy.
Right. So in that sense, too, I guess it makes sense for Vietnam to want to move into more maybe software services type segments and away from exports that perhaps they've been relying on for a long time.
Exactly. Yes.
This, as you said, is a super interesting time for Vietnam's tech sector, and I'm so glad you're there covering it for us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Mai. That's all for this week's episode. For more of Nikkei Asia's tech coverage, visit asia.nikkei.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly tech newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. Thanks again for listening, and check back with us next week for more updates on the tech trends that matter.